So what's the difference between summary and analysis? I'm going to start by saying that most of the time what y'all are doing in your papers and potentially shouldn't be is just summarizing. Summarizing is basically just sort of retelling what happened in a brief way. Now, it's not a skill that is completely unnecessary. It is helpful, but it's about, I suppose, scale. So I want you to think about summary. You should be doing maybe 20% of the time or less, whereas 80% of your paper should be analysis. So summary becomes really important because you want to assume that someone has watched something or has read something, but maybe watched or read it a long time ago, or maybe isn't looking at the same things that you're looking at. So summary is important maybe at the beginning, right, of your introduction, where you explain the gist of what happened in the film in like a sentence or two, no more than that. So just kind of like a, hey, quick refresher, remember this is what happens in this film, right? And, obviously, summary can be helpful when you're recounting what happens in a particular scene, but that summary is really setting the scene for your analysis, okay? So analysis, the other thing that's important is to figure out who's the subject of the sentence, okay? So that is really critical. Who is the subject of your sentences? So if we're talking about Aladdin, right? We've got, okay, well, Aladdin's, stole this loaf of bread and started singing about, I don't know, School of Hard Knocks, growing up on the streets, right? The difference is that in summary, it's always the characters who are the subjects of your sentences, right? But in an analysis, your focus should shift from the director, the choices that the filmmakers are themselves making. And so that really becomes the central thing that I want you to keep in mind, is that when you're doing analysis, you're really looking at the choices that the filmmakers are making in their film, right? How are they representing poverty? Well, one of the ways that they are representing poverty is that they re-emphasize this idea of the deserving poor. And they show this specifically by looking at X and Y scene, and use X and Y examples that they use in how they're characterizing Aladdin, right? So that's the difference here, is that it's all about the choices that the filmmakers themselves are making, okay? What choices are the filmmakers making, all right? And that becomes really important. So what choices are they making? And that's when you're going to be kind of looking at examples from the film, right? Now, obviously, when you're kind of looking at those examples, you might have to do a tiny bit of summary, but the key thing is your summaries need to be sort of specific and focused on specific examples, okay? So remember that even as you are summarizing, you want to really do artful summaries that are short, right? And that showcase the specific examples that you want to zero in on. And even after you've mentioned that piece, right, you also then want to explain why it matters, right? So once you find those examples, you're going to have to translate how those examples that you've just brought up support your argument and support this larger case that you're making. And remember that in analysis here, we're looking at the rhetorical choices that directors are making and how they are, potentially challenging some of the stereotypes that, get mentioned in so many children's films, right? So are they challenging those stereotypes? Or are they kind of like reifying them by just repeating them, right? Uncritically, right? So that's kind of the key. And sometimes, obviously, they could be doing a bit of both, right? The idea here is that you're going to want to zero in on those moments that, kind of really push the needle in a productive way. And then times where you're like, yeah, this is relying on the same low-hanging fruit, okay? And if it's relying on the same low-hanging fruit, explain why that's not like such an ideal thing. And you can pull from academic articles to sort of support your analysis. Or if they're doing something different that is really challenging, some of the low-hanging fruit that tends to be repeated, say, in representing, working people or women or people who aren't straight, whatever, the idea is that when you get those really cool examples where they're challenging some specific, stereotype or archetype that's harmful, then you can explain why it's so important that they do that. What's the big deal? What's the impact, right? So the difference, again, is that with summary, you're talking about what happened, right, in a film, whereas an analysis, which is what you want to do, again, at least 80% of the time or more, right? That's when you're saying, hey, the filmmakers are the subjects of my sentences, and what I'm doing is I'm looking at the choices that they're making in representing women or in representing working class people or in representing people with disabilities or whatever, okay? So that's really the key difference here, right? Is that it's the difference between what happened and what choices are made and why those are important, okay? There we go.